So today's session, spinning the Dama DM block wheel, navigating data storage operations with your Alation catalog. So kind of a mouthful. I'm just going to call it the data management wheel just to save me some tongue twisters. And I'll try keeping your guys' heads from spinning, and we'll just spin that wheel, landing on that operation piece. From a high level agenda, we're going to talk about, what is the data management body of knowledge DMOC book. What is data storage and operations? From there, we'll talk about the data lifecycle, and then we'll come full circle and how this applies to your Alation catalog. So at the very beginning of this session, Diane put a poll up, which was what first comes to mind when you hear data management. And I shouldn't be surprised that we have such a smart group here. We are Alationals. We do use the data catalog. So over 70% of you guys guessed it right, which is all of the above. Data management isn't a single slice, although oftentimes we think of it as a single slice. We might think, oh, it's ETL. Oh, it's metadata, it's data quality, it's master data management. It's how we store our data, it's how we load our data, it's things like that. But it's really a lot more than that. There's various elements. And in my past two Alation briefs, I've really focused on master data management. I've incorporated reference data management. So I've only done a small slice of this. I've decided in this session to, take a step back, look at the wheel from a really holistic standpoint, and take on another slice, and that slice being data storage and operations. So in my past life, I was an Oracle DBA, so where I spent a lot of my time was in this slice of data management, in that data storage and operations piece. And really what I've come to realize with working at Alation is, the catalog is a place that allows governance. And governance, as we see here in the Tama wheel, is the center, is the heart of it all, is the core of this wheel of data management. It's that proper data governance that enables the proper use of data storage and operation. It's the data governance piece that enables things like data security. It's the data governance piece that allows for document and content management. And then when we think about the Alation data catalog, it's overlaid onto this. It does touch on all these things. The catalog really is a platform at its heart that allows for data governance. And I thought data and storage and operations specifically was a really good place to kind of think, how can we incorporate the catalog? How can we get users thinking a little bit differently about the catalog and not just focusing on, some of those things like, document and content management? I know terms, articles, documents, glossaries, that's in that realm. So we think about it when we think about reference and master data and data quality, also things we've thought about with the catalog and incorporating it. But I really wanted to pay attention to this specific slice just because of the pains I've struggled without having a catalog. If I could save someone that struggle, I think it would be, essentially smart. Lending onto the data maturity standpoint, when we really think about data management from a holistic fashion, we really think about being mature in all of these fashions, and governance being such a critical piece of that in order to excel your organizations and really set that foundation for any other endeavor. So you really do need that governance piece to be a mature data organization. And it's because governance is at the center of this wheel that it's so important that a proper framework is put in place. But enough about this wheel, enough about data governance. We're really going to shift our focus to how we can incorporate these strategies into data storage and operations. So I really like to think of data storage and operations as kind of like a function. And what I mean it's a function is it requires these inputs, it requires activities, it requires a set of people. These things all put together is going to generate an outcome. So we see here from the input standpoint, the data architecture, service level agreements, data models, data requirements from the business or from the application team are those inputs. When we think about activities, we're going to see things surrounding managed database technologies, managing database operations. So really understanding the technology, evaluating the technology, monitoring these technologies, developing database instances, migrating, testing, decommissioning, all these activities that play a part when we really think about, databases and storage and operations. And then we have this people component. This people component is really who's responsible for these data and storage operations. It's going to be those database administrators, it's going to be software developers, creating requirements, it's going to be application teams, it's going to be that end consumer. And I think data storage and operations is such a critical piece to bake into your catalog. Not because it's the most important, because as we saw, they each have an equal slice, because it's really something that we don't always think about. I think databases kind of live in their own kingdom in some frameworks, and with that own kingdom, we don't have that full visibility, we don't have that governance overlaid, and we really need to be cognizant of how we can put these things together to generate proper business outcomes. And one of those proper business outcomes, it's data available throughout its life cycle, it's data with its integrity ensured, and it's that performance metrics are met and we are met. So really, when we think about these outcomes, when we think about these goals, we really want to think how we could incorporate those things into the catalog to really manage the data life cycle. And I've said data life cycle a few times now, and I really want to get into that because I think at its core, when we think data storage and operations, when we think data management, it is that life cycle management. So looking at here, I like to break down the data life cycle into these 6 steps: creation, processing, storage, usage, archiving, destruction. You might have a couple others, you might think some can be combined, but really at that 30,000 feet, this is really what I like to consider. And when I like thinking of data management, in particularly data storage and operations, I really think data management is really life cycle management. So it's really thinking about the data from its creation all the way to its downstream destruction, and how a catalog can be overlaid into this is what we're going to be getting into in just a second. But to just talk about data lifecycle and these steps a little bit more, breaking down each of these steps. At first, we have data creation, and this could be broken down into a variety of sub-steps. So, when we think creation, it could be things like data acquisition. So acquiring data from maybe a third-party organization, maybe think Duns and Bradstreet, something like that. We also have data entry. So that's when a user, humans, devices throughout your organization is capturing data or inputting data and creating that new data. So really that creation piece that we're probably most familiar with. And then we have data capture. This is where data can be generated through a variety of devices in an organization. Think Internet of Things sensors. And this is going to be more of a universal 360 type view when we think about how the data is created. And how the data created is such an important part to the whole piece of governance, to what we try to achieve to get the most value out of our data assets. Because really, when we think about data lifecycle management, when we think about data storage and operations, it's really the implementation and support of this data to maximize its value. So we really need to understand that context surrounding creation. Next, we have data processing. Data processing is often referred to, data maintenance. It could be things like ETL, so your integration, your cleansing, your scrubbing, your extracting, transformation, your load, and things of that nature. So it's really how the data is massaged, how it's moved throughout the organization, and then we get to that next step, which is storage. So this is probably what we kind of consider with, how are we storing it? Is it in the cloud? Is it on-prem? How is it encrypted? How do we control access? Things of that nature. Is it backed up? Is there a DR recovery? Is it replicated? What environment is it sitting in? When we think, dev, QA, production, all these things are going to surround that data storage part. Then we have that data usage part. Data becomes truly useful and empowers organizations to make decisions. So that usage part is key. We need users to use data. It's an asset in order to make those informed business decisions, in order to drive value. So really thinking of data either as a service or even as a product, in this case, when we think about usage and the various responsibilities that come along with usage. The next two, we have data archiving and data destruction. So data archiving, to kind of show the difference between destruction, it's removed from all active production environments and copied to another environment. It's no longer processed, it's no longer being used, it's not published. it still exists, but users aren't really consuming it in any downstream applications at this point. So that's that archiving piece. And then that last piece where it kind of all ends and comes together is that data destruction or data purging. This refers to removing every copy of the data from the organization. Typically, this is done from achieving it from a single archive storage location. And this is an extremely crucial part. Even if you wanted to keep your data absolutely forever, there's a few reasons we can't. One, it become extremely expensive as data volumes explode over time. As we see that exponential growth, we're going to see those costs that come with capturing and storing this data for the long term. So we need to have some type of strategy in effect in order for the proper destruction. From a regulatory standpoint, think GDPR, certain types of data can't live forever. For legal reasons, or if a user no longer wants an organization to have their data, there needs to be strategies and policies in place to help govern how we go about handling that. How are records actually destroyed? What does that process look like in order to ensure business continuity and business prosperity? So again, those are the 6 steps of that data lifecycle management. It's important that you have a data management plan. And in the appendix of this deck, I have about 5 guiding principles that I'll share with you guys if we have time in that appendix, that really helps you craft your own data management plan. And this is extremely comprehensive because it just doesn't touch on things like, oh, we have to classify this data this way. It really takes a step back and addresses each aspect of this life cycle, ensuring you have the proper needs in place to ensure that you can manage, you can control how data is managed, described, and stored. And then lastly, on this for the lifecycle management, proper lifecycle management directly impacts your business. And as we all move into this new digital age, as digital transformation is such a big thing, we want to make sure we have the right tools in place that are going to make navigating that transformation as seamless as possible. The catalog is going to be that catalyst that allows you to navigate this transformation in a proper way and make sure you don't miss any steps. So now let's come full circle and think how this actually can come together with the catalog. We're going to start with coming together with creation and processing. So those first 2 steps of the data lifecycle. So some use cases that we have with creation and processing, we have that question often is where the data is derived from. This is extremely important for you as a business user to know. You may come across data within the catalog, but you need that additional context. You need to know what application or applications is generating it. In the example here, we have a variety of applications. So we have a booking system, a customer system, and then some just next-gen solution that's all generating this data. And we need to know that these are the applications doing so. So if there was a data quality issue, if there was a remediation that needs to occur, we need to be able to identify the application in which this remediation needs to occur. If it is that upstream. The catalog does a great job with lineage of showing data sources, but from a custom field standpoint, we could go a step beyond just understanding data sources and really start understanding applications. We also need to really realize who's responsible from an operational standpoint. When I talked about operations and storage, those key persona that we often associate with this phase in the data management wheel is DBAs. So having a people set called DBAs and addressing them in the catalog is a great way we ensure that we have that continuity, that when there is an issue, we know who to direct our questions to. This doesn't have to be called DBA by any means. This could be considered technical owner, data owner, technical steward, a wide variety of options, application owner, but really assigning this who is responsible from an operational standpoint, which might look different than a steward, is incredibly important for that reason. Associating SLAs with specific data sources also crucial. This could be done by creating policies that define the SLA. The example I have here is an SLA for all Snowflake assets. So I'm able to link it just using an object set. Again, providing that context to how we go about handling, the certain data source. We want it to be a single stop for all our users to come to and be able to consume that information. Having a policy like SLA is associated is extremely important. And then the last thing I call out here in that application service information custom grouping is that environment aspect. So I called out that this is a dev source. We need users to know what they're looking at when they're running queries, when they're running reports, when they're establishing connections with other systems. We need to have them know that clearly this is dev, this is production, this is QA. That can easily be accomplished by our naming standards at that source level, but we could also create a custom field that allows the user to select from all these things. So really what I like to think about with these, different use cases is context. Context is key when it comes to creation and processing. We really need to understand how things occur. From a processing standpoint, I have an example of lineage down there. So we can see how the view was created. We can see where the data is eventually going. And lineage in the catalog is just providing that additional context. Again, hitting on the importance of this, hitting on the importance of context, it's going to allow your team to better act and make decisive data-driven decisions on what's happening, what is happening in the catalog, what needs to be done, so we can move that much smoother in our operations. The next area I want to talk about is the storage and usage aspects of the data lifecycle. So thinking use cases again, we need to understand how data is stored. We need to understand the DR processes in place. We need to understand where the data exists. Is this data replicated anywhere? We need to, again, denote the environment of the source and show how to get access to this data and make it a seamless process. So attaching that to a data source, that request that takes you to ServiceNow to takes you to Jira is a critical way to really allow for that access, allow for that usage piece. And really what I think this storage and usage is about is location, location, location. It just doesn't apply to real estate. It also applies to your data. So really having a well thought out plan on, replication, disaster recovery, having the proper framework in place for user access is all critical when we think about storage and usage. And this is how we can incorporate it in the catalog. So I have a couple policies on screen, SLAs, retention, replication, recovery, all those different areas that are so critical when we're thinking about that data management plan in order to set your organization up for success. So really, from a maturity and value standpoint, it's critical to have these proper documentations in place to ensure, again, that business continuity. I think that's a huge theme when we think about data ops and data storage, is that we can allow the business to continue to drive value, to drive and maximize value from their data. And then the last thing I want to call out is archiving and destruction. So this one really hits home for me. Like I mentioned, I started my data career as an Oracle DBA. Coming out of college and being in an infrastructure position, a lot of my responsibilities surrounded, upgrading data sources, the destruction and decommissioning of data sources. And at the time, I was an Oracle DBA for a financially important, financially systemic important institution within the finance space. And it kind of is scary to look back at it now. How we ran our data lifecycle management was out of Excel. I distinctly remember having a little Excel cell with that bright yellow highlight that says to be decommissioned. And just thinking that the whole 700 or so databases under our Oracle preview was manage their life cycle if they needed to be upgraded, what they needed to be, when they needed to be decommissioned, was managed through an Excel, really just kind of scared me looking back at it. And again, the world is probably ran Excel. I see a comment in the chat, and I agree with you, Jim. Excel is the universal data management tool, but that doesn't mean it should be. I think the catalog offers a lot more functionality from an audit standpoint, from a setting standpoint, from a mass curation standpoint, that really allows you to kind of see, okay, what databases that we have, what data sources do we have are in life, needs upgrading, is into that to decommission standpoint. That's in that decommission standpoint. So really understanding that cycle of the life cycle is extremely important. Some things like top users and query log ingestion in the form of query history really allows you to say, okay, do we need this data source anymore? So really thinking from an archiving and destruction standpoint, there's reasons why we can't keep data forever. I mentioned a couple at the very beginning of the presentation, but really it comes down to costing a lot of times. If the data is not being used, we should destroy it, but we need to ensure that it's not being used before we completely decommission a system. The catalog really allows for areas like that. Again, hitting on that importance from a regulatory standpoint, from a cost standpoint, it's really important that we achieve a proper archive and destruction standpoint and able to move the data into those phases. And these are dangerous phases, let's call it, because we don't want to decommission anything that's not supposed to be decommissioned, so on and so forth. And this is also, I think, where we could fit that migration piece in. When we think about top users, when we think about lineage, when we think about query log ingestion, we can really see, okay, we're moving from on-prem to the cloud. What activities need to be in place? Who do we need to let know before we go through with this move? So really highlighting the importance there. Again, coming full circle with the catalog, we can use the catalog in so many ways. We shouldn't be thinking about it from just a data governance standpoint, from just a discovery tool, from just a place to document terms. It really can be much more than that. And I think our wider variety of custom fields really allows for that extra level. That's all I had today, folks. I do have that appendix, and then I do have this data management, those 5 guidance steps to really help to ensure that you have the proper things set up and in place.